The hive had stood for 10,000 years. Its spires clawed at the polluted skies, its underbelly sank into the black soil, and its people, billions of souls stacked in tiers of poverty and excess, never imagined it could fall. The hive was eternal. The hive was everything. Then came the fire. The orbital strike was not clean, not surgical. It was a planetary execution, a lance of heat that tore atmosphere apart and brought the heavens screaming down. The sky went white. The towers melted, collapsing into storms of stone and iron. Whole districts crumbled as though struck by the fist of a god. Down in the mid-level habs, civilians saw only a blinding flash. Mothers covered children. Merchants hid beneath stalls. Then the walls split open and the ceiling fell, and 1 billion tons of hive collapsed in on itself. There was no warning. No salvation. Only the slow-motion terror of being buried alive. Hours later, the survivors woke in the dark. Dust choked the air. Fires burned where oxygen bled through cracks. The once great hive was now a tomb. Families clawed through rubble with bleeding fingers, searching for voices in the blackness. Some found only corpses. Others found nothing at all. And in that darkness, something else stirred. The orbital strike had not been random. It had not been mercy. It had been purging fire, sent to burn out an infestation. Deep within the hive, beneath the rubble and the bodies, Genestealer cults had thrived. Their nests had sprawled like cancers, hidden for decades, spreading their infection of faith and blood. Now, with the city shattered, the cultists emerged. Not as saviors. Not as brothers. But as hunters. To the survivors, the collapse was only the first horror. Crawling through the ruins, blind and terrified, they would come to know the truth: the strike had not killed them. It had delivered them to the waiting claws of something worse. And in the ash, the cult whispered. In the rubble, the brood fed. And every prayer for deliverance was swallowed in silence. The hive burned, and the people screamed. This is their story. The world returned in fragments. First came sound, the groaning of metal, the distant crackle of fire, the endless drip of water somewhere in the black. Then came sensation, the sting of grit against skin, the weight of rubble pressing down, the ache in every bone. Finally came the air, thick, foul, full of dust that clawed at lungs with every gasp. Elira dragged herself from unconsciousness, her head swimming. The light was gone. The market where she had been moments before, gone. Her stall, her coins, her neighbors, gone. In their place, a cavern of twisted steel and shattered stone. Around her, faint voices rose like ghosts. Cries of pain. Screams for mothers, for children, for anyone. They echoed through the collapsed hab blocks, distorted by tunnels of rubble, until no voice could be followed to its source. Elira pressed her hand against her temple and felt blood. It didn't matter. She forced herself upright. She was not alone. A man stumbled toward her from the shadows, face blackened with soot, eyes wide with terror. His arm was broken, bent at an impossible angle, yet still he reached out to her as though she might save him. Behind him limped another, dragging a child whose leg was twisted beneath a slab of ferrocrete. The girl screamed with every tug. They were survivors, like her. Survivors of something no one should have survived. They gathered slowly, drawn together like insects to the faintest flicker of safety. From broken tunnels, from cracks in walls, from beneath shattered stairways, they crawled. Dozens at first. then hundreds. Covered in dust, coughing blood, they emerged into what little open space the ruins allowed, a collapsed plaza where once merchants sold wares. Now it was nothing but a pit of rubble lit by fire leaking through the ceiling. Some wept. Some prayed. Some sat in silence, staring at nothing. And above all of it was the sound, a constant rumble, as if the hive itself was still dying, collapsing slowly into its own grave. "Help will come," an old man whispered, clutching a string of beads. "The Arbites, the guard, they'll dig us out. They'll save us." But others shook their heads. The strike had not been accidental. They had seen the sky split apart. They had seen the beams fall deliberately upon their city. Help was not coming. That night, though night had no meaning in the endless dark, they searched the ruins. Scavengers dug through corpses for water canisters, for scraps of food. Others tore cloth from the dead to bind wounds. Every corner of the hive had become grave and shelter both. Elira found herself among a small band. The child with the twisted leg, her father, who refused to let go of her hand, and a young man named Darren, whose voice cracked every time he spoke, though he tried to sound strong. They shared what little water they found in a fractured pipe. The child whimpered with fever. Darren whispered comfort. Elira listened, staring into the shadows, wondering if the ground itself would crush them before morning. But it was not the ground she should have feared. The first scream came from the eastern tunnels. Short, sharp, and cut off before it finished. Heads snapped toward the sound. Survivors froze, waiting. Another scream followed. Then a third. Then silence. Some said it was rubble shifting. Others prayed louder, trying to banish the sound with hymns. But the old ones knew. They remembered rumors of the underhive. They remembered the stories whispered of cults in the shadows. "Don't go near the dark," one woman muttered, her eyes wild. "Stay close to the fires. Don't go into the tunnels." Darren frowned. "Why?" "Because that's where they live," she whispered. The survivors slept uneasily, if they slept at all. The fires burned low, fed with broken furniture and rags. Beyond their glow, the tunnels gaped like mouths. Something moved out there. Shapes flickered in the corner of vision. Pale limbs scuttled along walls, then vanished when looked at directly. A stench hung in the air, sweet, rotting, animal. Elira held the child in her arms as she drifted in and out of restless half-sleep. In her dreams, she saw claws scraping against stone. She saw eyes glowing faintly in the dust. She saw mouths opening, not to speak, but to feed. When she woke, her dreams had followed her. The sounds were real. By the next day, the plaza was emptier. Entire groups had vanished overnight, their fires cold, their belongings scattered. No screams this time. No struggle. Just gone. The old woman wept, muttering prayers through cracked lips. Others began to whisper that it was hopeless, that death was inevitable. Some even spoke of surrender, to what, no one dared say aloud. Elira clenched her fists. She did not know what hunted them, but she knew one thing: they would not wait here to die. She would not. "We have to move," she told Darren. "We can't stay in the open." He looked at her with hollow eyes. "And go where?" "Anywhere but here. Down. There are maintenance tunnels. Sewers. Somewhere with walls. Somewhere we can hide. The father of the child nodded weakly. Better to move than wait for the dark to take us. And so, with nothing but desperation to guide them, a small band of survivors gathered what little strength remained and prepared to descend deeper into the hive. Into the underhive, where the air was thicker, the dark was deeper, and the cult waited. They left the plaza at dusk, though dusk was only the dimming of their last fire. Their footsteps echoed through broken tunnels. Their breaths rasped in the dust. Behind them, the survivors who stayed clung to hope. They prayed to the Emperor. They waited for rescue. But as the band moved away, Elira heard it, faint at first, then clearer. The sound of claws scraping stone. The sound of something following. She gripped the child's hand tighter. In the ashes of the hive, death was patient. And it was hungry. The tunnels breathed. Every step the survivors took seemed to wake something slumbering in the stone. Air shifted in faint, unnatural drafts. Dust rained from cracks. The groans of the dying hive followed them like whispers in the dark. Elira led the way, her hands trembling as she held a broken steel rod like a weapon. Behind her, Darren carried a shard of pipe, its jagged edge glinting faintly in the weak glow of a scavenged chem lantern. The child clung to her father's hand, whimpering at every echo. Their little group, 7 in all, walked like shadows, pressed close, afraid to breathe too loud. The further they descended, the more the hive changed. Once these tunnels had been maintenance routes, service shafts, sewage arteries, forgotten passageways. Now they were graves. Corpses lay in heaps, some crushed by falling stone, others torn apart in ways rubble could not explain. Elira tried not to look at the bodies. Their faces were too human. Too familiar. They passed through a chamber where the walls were slick with moisture, pipes hissing steam into the air. Rust clung to everything, and pools of stagnant water reflected their lanterns' weak light. The smell was unbearable, rot, oil, and something sweeter underneath, a cloying stench that made Elira gag. "What is that?" Darren whispered, covering his mouth with his sleeve. The old men in their group, a miner named Corinne, shook his head. Not rot. Not mold. His voice was low, almost reverent, as though speaking too loud would invite something closer. "It's brute stench. I've smelled it before. In the deep shafts." The others stared at him. "You mean the cult?" Elira asked. Corinne nodded grimly. "They live down here. Always have. Preaching, breeding, spreading. We thought it was rumor. Superstition. But I saw it. Saw them take men into the shadows and come out, different." The child whimpered again. Her father shushed her, but his hands shook. The path twisted deeper, through collapsed stairwells and into a service corridor lined with rusted doors. Most were jammed or crushed, but one stood slightly open, hanging on its hinges. A faint glow seeped from inside. Darren raised a hand, halting the group. "Light," he whispered. They gathered at the door, hearts pounding. Elira pushed it open with the end of her rod, and the lantern light revealed a small chamber, once a storeroom, now a shrine. Symbols scrawled in blood covered the walls, spirals, clawed hands, crude depictions of star beasts descending from the sky. Candles burned low, their wax melted into grotesque shapes. At the center of the room, an altar of rubble and bones stood, topped with a child's skull crowned with wires and broken jewelry. One of the survivors gasped. Another crossed himself desperately, whispering prayers. "They worship them," Darren muttered. His voice shook with revulsion. The monsters. Not worship, Corinne said. Reverence. Family. To them, these beasts aren't death. They're salvation. Elira felt her skin crawl. The air in the chamber seemed thicker, pressing against her chest. She wanted to run, but her feet held still, transfixed by the crude paintings. They showed humans bowing before towering alien forms, their faces twisted in ecstasy. It was not death they sought. It was union. They left quickly, but the images clung to them. Every shadow seemed longer now. Every sound carried meaning. Hours passed. Their lantern burned lower. They moved slower, exhaustion gnawing at their strength. Hunger clawed at their bellies. The child's fever worsened. Still, they pressed on, driven by the instinct that forward meant survival. Then came the sound. A chittering, faint at first, like insects clicking their jaws together. It echoed from the tunnels ahead, too steady, too deliberate to be natural. The group froze. Darren lifted the lantern, his hand shaking so violently the light danced wildly across the walls. The chittering grew louder. Closer. And then, silence. Nothing but their breathing and the drip of water. Elira's heart hammered in her chest. She gripped her rod tighter, her palms slick with sweat. Move, Corinne hissed. Now. They ran. Stumbling, panting, clutching each other in the dark, they pushed deeper into the underhive. The lantern swung wildly, throwing monstrous shapes against the walls. Every shadow looked like claws. Every corner looked like teeth. Behind them, faint footsteps followed. Light, quick, scuttling. Always just out of sight. They turned a corner and found themselves in another chamber, larger this time, its ceiling high and broken open to the levels above. Shafts of pale light filtered through the cracks, illuminating rubble piled into strange, deliberate mounds. At first, Elira thought they were just collapsed stone. But then she saw the bones. Human bones, stacked neatly into spirals. And she realized they were not in a chamber at all. They were in a nest. The chittering returned, this time all around them. From the cracks above, from tunnels on either side, pale shapes emerged. Thin, lithe forms with 2 long limbs and 2 bright eyes. Human in outline, but wrong, their heads too elongated, their jaws too sharp, their hands tipped with claws. Genestealer cultists. The survivors pressed together, trembling. Darren raised the lantern higher, its dying light flickering across dozens of twisted faces. Some were nearly human, their mutations slight. Others were monstrous, their bodies half-beast, half-man, their eyes burning with alien hunger. They did not attack immediately. They circled, clicking their claws against stone, their mouths opening in silent grins. They watched with something worse than malice. Recognition. To them, these survivors were not prey. They were kin, lost children who had not yet been blessed. Elira's stomach twisted as one of the creatures stepped forward, its voice a rasping whisper that echoed through the chamber. Brothers, sisters, you have survived the fire. Come to us. Come to the family. The cultists reached out with clawed hands, beckoning. Their eyes glowed with fanatic joy. Behind Elira, the child screamed. And in that scream, the fragile illusion shattered. The cultists moved. Claws scraped stone. Shadows lunged. Teeth gleamed in the lantern light. The nest had awakened. The hunt had begun. The lantern sputtered. Its last flame fought against the suffocating dark, throwing wild shadows across the bone-stacked chamber. The cultists closed in, their pale skin shining wetly, their claws scraping with deliberate rhythm. Elira pulled the feverish child close. Darren raised his broken pipe, his knuckles white. Corinne muttered prayers under his breath, his eyes locked on the things that had once been human. The voice came again. Smooth. Persuasive. Inhuman. Do not fear us. You are family. You belong to the brood. The fire above could not take you because you are chosen. A figure stepped forward. Taller than the rest, its face was half human, half alien, its skull ridged with bone, its mouth filled with sharp, gleaming teeth. Robes of scavenged cloth hung from its twisted frame, painted with blood and symbols of claws and stars. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim. The Emperor has abandoned you, it hissed, stretching its arms wide. But we welcome you. Join us, and your suffering will end. The survivors shook, torn between terror and a strange pull in the creature's voice. Even Elira felt it, a sickening suggestion in her thoughts, a whisper that promised safety, family, belonging. No, she spat, forcing the word out through clenched teeth. We are not yours. The leader's smile widened, lips stretching impossibly. You will be. Then the chittering rose, louder now, echoing through the hive like a storm of insects. The cultists surged forward. Chaos erupted. Darren swung his pipe wildly, smashing it against the nearest creature's skull. It reeled back, shrieking, but three more lunged at him, dragging him down. Corinne stabbed with a shard of rebar, his old arms trembling but fierce. The child's father swung a piece of stone like a hammer, screaming until his voice broke. Elira clutched the girl tight and ran. She didn't know where, only away from the claws, the teeth, the whispers. She stumbled over rubble, nearly falling, the child's sobs ringing in her ears. Behind her, she heard Darren cry out, a sharp, agonized scream that was cut short by a wet tearing sound. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The survivors scattered through the nest. Some were dragged down instantly, their cries muffled beneath swarming claws. Others fled into tunnels, their footsteps echoing in panic. The cultists pursued, their movements unnervingly fast, their laughter filling the dark. Elira and the father ducked into a side passage, stumbling through a narrow tunnel lined with bones. The air was thicker here, damp and sweet with decay. The child clung to Elira's neck, sobbing silently now, too weak to scream. Keep moving, Elira gasped. Don't stop. But the father faltered. He was bleeding from a deep gash across his chest, each step slower than the last. They're coming, he panted. They'll catch us. No, Elira started, but the sound of claws scraping stone silenced her. Shadows flickered at the tunnel's mouth. The father stopped. He looked at Elira, at the girl, and something hardened in his eyes. Take her. Before Elira could argue, he shoved the child into her arms and turned back toward the tunnel mouth. With a hoarse roar, he raised his makeshift hammer and charged. The last thing Elira saw before she ran was the father swallowed by pale shapes, his cries drowned in chittering laughter. She fled blindly, clutching the girl, her body scraping against jagged walls. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled. Every breath tasted of blood and ash. At last she stumbled into another chamber, smaller, darker, filled with broken machinery and collapsed scaffolding. She collapsed behind a fallen pipe, pressing the child against her chest, smothering their breaths. The chittering followed. It was everywhere now, echoing through pipes, rattling in the walls, a living nightmare that surrounded them on all sides. Elira bit her lip until blood filled her mouth. She prayed, though she had no faith left. Not to the Emperor, who had remained silent through fire and ruin. Not to the saints, who were dust. She prayed only for silence, that the monsters would pass them by. For a moment, it seemed they had. The chittering moved past. Shadows flickered at the chamber's edge, then vanished into the tunnels beyond. Elira dared to breathe again. Then she heard it, soft, wet, almost tender. A sound like a newborn cooing. She turned her head slowly. From the darkness above, clinging to the wall like a spider, a shape hung. Its limbs were long and spindly, its skin slick with slime. Its head was swollen, bulbous, with a mouth full of needle teeth. It rocked gently, staring down at her with eyes full of alien devotion. The sound came again, a mimicry of a child's cry. Elira froze. The girl whimpered. And the creature smiled. The nest had not just awakened. It had found her. The creature clung above her, its limbs trembling in anticipation, drool dripping from its fanged mouth. Elira dared not move. The child's breath tickled her neck, shallow and fast, like a rabbit hiding from the hawk. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the walls seemed alive, the shadows pulsing with the promise of death. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the spider-limbed horror tilted its head, chittered softly, and crawled back into the dark. Its body melted into the hive walls as though it had never been there at all. Elira exhaled shakily. "Shoo," she whispered to the girl. "Just a dream. Just a dream." But it wasn't. The nest was awake, and it was watching. The chamber was too exposed. Elira crept forward, holding the girl tight, her ears straining for the slightest sound. The tunnels bent downward, deeper into the hive's veins. She prayed for an exit but knew in her gut that she was only sinking closer to the brood's heart. She reached a staircase half buried in rubble. Rust flaked from the railing, and the steps groaned under her weight. The air grew warmer, heavier, thick with a sweetness that made her stomach twist. The smell of meat. At the bottom, the tunnel widened into a cavern. What remained of a manufactorum had been transformed into something obscene. Pipes and beams were smothered in pulsing organic growth, veins spreading like ivy across the walls. Bones were wired into grotesque altars, candles guttering in skulls, their wax dripping over hollow eyes. And everywhere, the sound of breathing. Hundreds of throats inhaling and exhaling in unison, a choir of hunger. Elira froze at the threshold. They were there. Dozens, no, hundreds, of cultists knelt in the chamber, their heads bowed in silent worship. Some still bore scraps of human clothing, factory rags stained with soot and blood. Others were barely human at all, their bodies twisted, their jaws elongated, claws protruding where hands should have been. At the far end of the cavern, an altar rose from fused steel and bone. Upon it, the robed leader stretched his arms wide, his ridged skull glowing in the firelight. His voice slithered through the chamber, low and reverent. The day is near. The Great Father stirs. His brood rises from the ashes, and soon the sky will break with his coming. A shudder of ecstasy rippled through the congregation. The child whimpered, burying her face into Elira's chest. Too loud. The sound carried. The cultists lifted their heads. One by one, hundreds of glowing eyes turned toward the tunnel mouth. Elira's blood froze. "Run," she whispered, but her legs already moved, dragging the girl with her. She stumbled back up the stairs, the pounding of feet erupting behind her. The cult had risen. They did not run like men. They surged like a tide, claws scraping stone, voices shrieking praises to their unseen god. Elira's lungs burned. The girl screamed in her arms. She stumbled, almost falling, but forced herself forward, slamming her shoulder into a half-open hatch. It groaned, resisted, then gave way. She tumbled through, slamming the door shut behind her. The clang rang like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, silence. Then claws raked the other side, shrieks echoing through the steel. Elira backed away, clutching the girl. They weren't safe. Not here. Not anywhere. The tunnel beyond was narrow, littered with collapsed piping and broken crates. She limped forward, too tired to think, driven only by fear. The girl whimpered again, this time not in terror but pain. Elira stopped, kneeling to look. The child's arm was slick with blood, a shallow cut from rubble, but enough to leave a trail. Blood. They would smell it. Elira's stomach lurched. She tore a strip from her tunic and wrapped it tight, hushing the girl as tears rolled down her small face. "We'll make it," Elira lied, forcing strength into her voice. "We'll find light again." The light tasted like ash. Minutes stretched into eternity. The tunnel twisted, dipped, then opened into another chamber. Smaller, darker, filled with water dripping from above. And in the center, half submerged in slime, was something far worse than the cult. A cocoon. It pulsed gently, slick with fluid, taller than a man. The surface quivered with each sound Elira made, as though something inside heard her. Shapes pressed against the membrane, claws, jaws, a face not yet born. The brood's true children. Waiting. Growing. The girl whimpered again. The cocoon shuddered in response. Elira's knees nearly gave way. She backed into the shadows, hard hammering, holding the child close as tears burned her eyes. This wasn't a hive city anymore. It wasn't even hell. It was a womb. And the monsters weren't finished being born. The cocoon pulsed. Elira could not look away. The membrane stretched as something pressed within, sharp limbs scraping against its prison, a jaw opening in silence. It was a nightmare in gestation, and the sound of its heartbeat filled the chamber. She forced herself backward, clutching the girl tight. One step, two, her foot hit metal, a half-buried grate. It groaned under her weight, and the cocoon twitched. The thing inside was waking. Elira's panic ignited. She yanked the child and scrambled into the grate, pulling herself through the tight opening. Rust bit her palms, slime smeared her face, but she didn't stop until they collapsed into another tunnel. Behind them, the cocoon split. A wet tearing sound echoed down the passage. Something was free. The tunnel tilted steeply, forcing them down again. The walls grew slick, glistening as though sweat oozed from the hive itself. The air was warmer, choking, filled with a musk that burned her throat. She staggered onward, half carrying the child. Somewhere behind, claws scraped. They were being hunted. The girl whimpered, whispering, "They're coming." Elira pressed her hand over the child's mouth, shaking her head. She listened. Yes. Footsteps, not human. A clicking rhythm, faster, closer. Elira stumbled toward a collapsed shaft ahead, where broken rebar bent like the ribs of a giant carcass. She squeezed through, dragging the girl after. The sound followed. Click, scrape, hiss. They burst into a cavern of shattered pipes and hanging cables. Sparks flickered overhead, throwing sharp shadows across the ruin. Pools of black water reflected the glow, rippling with every breath. Elira slipped, nearly falling. The girl cried out softly. And from the shadows, they emerged. Not one. Not dozens. A tide. Figures crawled along the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Some were the tattered remains of miners' uniforms, their faces stretched into half-human sneers. Others bore too many limbs, claws clicking against stone, eyes glowing with feral hunger. Genestealer cultists. The Hive's true congregation. They did not scream, not yet. They moved in silence, circling, tightening their noose. Elira's pulse thundered. There was no way through, no hope of outrunning them. She turned, searching desperately, and saw only one chance. A rusted maintenance ladder climbing into darkness. "Hold on," she whispered, lifting the girl onto her shoulders. Her hands closed around the ladder, slippery with oil, and she began to climb. Muscles burned, lungs screamed, but she climbed. The girl clung tight, sobbing quietly into her hair. Below, the cult hissed. The first shriek tore the silence apart. Then the swarm erupted, scrambling upward, their claws raking steel. Elira climbed faster, tears mixing with sweat. Each rung shook under her grip as the cult drew closer. She could hear their breath now, hot and rancid, rising on the air. One claw swiped, scraping her boot. She kicked, nearly losing her balance. Faster, she begged herself, pulling with everything left. At last, the shaft ended in a platform. She collapsed onto it, dragging the girl up with her. The hatch above was sealed, a heavy wheel lock rusted shut. Elira gritted her teeth and pushed. It didn't move. Below, claws clanged against the ladder. She screamed and threw her weight against the lock. Her arms trembled, her shoulder tore with pain, but slowly, painfully, the wheel groaned. Metal screeched as it turned. The hatch cracked open. A gush of stale air blasted her face. She shoved the girl through and scrambled after, slamming the hatch closed just as claws scraped the rim. The sound rang in her skull as the hatch sealed with a final, merciful clang. Silence. She collapsed, sobbing, the girl pressed against her chest. For the moment, they were safe. But the space above was no salvation. It was another cavern, this one vast and hollow, stretching into blackness. Ruined hab blocks jutted from the walls like broken teeth, their windows gaping with shadows. And in the center stood a pillar of bone and steel, fused together into something that should not exist. The surface writhed with veins. At its peak, a throne-like shape had been carved, and upon it, a figure sat. The Patriarch. A Genestealer the size of a tank, its body hunched, its jaws slack, its claws folded across its chest. It seemed asleep, but its presence was suffocating. Even in stillness, it dominated the chamber, radiating a hunger that was almost holy. Around it knelt the cult, hundreds of them, silent in reverence. Elira froze at the sight, terror hammering her body into stone. The girl whimpered again, and Elira slapped her hand across her mouth too late. The Patriarch stirred. Its jaws opened. The cavern shook as a hiss rolled through the air, echoing in every direction. Every cultist turned as one, their eyes locking onto Alira. She had seen fear before. She had lived in fear her whole life. But this was despair. There was nowhere left to run. The cult rose, their footsteps pounding like drums. Above them, the patriarch's eyes glowed, burning holes in the dark. Alira clutched the child, whispering, "Close your eyes." The girl obeyed. Alira did not. She stared into the abyss as the brood surged toward her, claws raised, shadows swallowing the last pieces of her soul. And the hive breathed, alive, rejoicing. The cavern trembled. At first, it was only the distant groan of metal, the faint shift of stone overhead. But then the air itself grew heavy, as if the hive drew a ragged breath. Dust sifted down from the broken ceiling, clinging to Alira's damp skin. The patriarch was waking. Its eyes burned in the dark like molten embers. A hiss spilled from its maw, low at first, then swelling into a roar that rattled the bones of the cavern. The cultists howled in response. They dropped to their knees, their claws extended, their voices blending into a hideous litany that reverberated through the hive. The sound was worship and war cry, hunger and devotion. The girl buried her face into Alira's chest, trembling. Alira pressed her hand against the child's head, though her own hands shook violently. There was no escape. Not here. Not anymore. The brood surged forward. They moved like a tide, claws clattering against steel, their bodies contorting through the shadows. Some crawled on all fours, others leapt from walls, their twisted limbs jerking with unnatural strength. Alira staggered backward, dragging the girl toward the edge of the platform. Below lay only blackness, another shaft yawning into the abyss. "Don't look," she whispered to the child, voice cracking. The girl whimpered. The first cultist reached them, its face half human, half nightmare. Its jaw split wider than it should, teeth glistening. It lunged. Alira kicked with everything she had, boots slamming into its throat. The creature tumbled back, screeching, but two more took its place. She turned to the shaft. There was no choice. She jumped. The fall was chaos. Air ripped past her ears. The girl screamed, arms locked around Alira's neck. Darkness swallowed them, endless, until a burst of pain lit her body. They crashed into a net of twisted cables. Metal cut into her skin, jolting her to a stop. She gasped, half blind, the girl sobbing but alive. Above, the brood shrieked in fury. Shapes leaned over the edge, claws swiping at air. But they did not leap. The brood was patient. The hive belonged to them. Alira and the girl dangled like flies in a web. She wrestled free, dropping to another ledge below. Her ankle buckled, but she forced herself upright. The child clung to her side. The cavern stretched outward again, this time into a hall of broken hab blocks. Doors gaped open like screaming mouths. Rusted rails hung over sheer drops, leading deeper into shadow. Alira limped forward. Each step echoed, and each echo carried back whispers. At first she thought it was her imagination. But no, voices, faint, hushed, beckoning. "Come," they whispered. "Join us. Family." The girl whimpered, "I hear them." Alira squeezed her hand tighter. "Ignore it." But the whispers grew louder. A shape emerged from one of the doorways. It was a woman, at least, once. Her body was gaunt, skin pale, but her belly bulged unnaturally, glowing veins pulsing across her flesh. Her eyes burned with fanatic devotion, fixed on Elira and the child. "Daughters," the woman crooned, voice sharp and broken. "The brood welcomes you. Do not run. Be whole. Be his." Elira's stomach twisted. She stepped back, clutching the girl. The woman opened her mouth, but what spilled out was not words. It was a scream that did not end. A call. The brood answered. The walls shifted with movement. Dozens of cultists spilled from the halves, their bodies slithering from shadows, their claws catching what light remained. Some bore faces Elira thought she recognized, miners, traders, neighbors, twisted now into masks of devotion. Her chest locked tight. "Run," she hissed to the child. They sprinted. Her ankle screamed with every step, but she didn't stop. The corridor twisted, rails shaking beneath them. Behind, the cult thundered, their shrieks like knives in her ears. The girl stumbled. Elira yanked her up. The brood closed in, hands reaching, claws snapping. Ahead, a collapsed bulkhead blocked the path. Trapped. Elira threw herself at the rubble, clawing at stone with bloody fingers. The girl tried to help, sobbing, pulling at metal scraps. Behind them, the cult's cries rose higher, closer. A hand caught Elira's arm. She screamed, spinning to strike. Her fist hit bone, splitting her knuckles, but the cultist only laughed. Its face leaned close, breath hot, reeking of decay. "Soon," it whispered. Elira shoved it back, slamming a rock into its skull. It fell, screeching, but more replaced it instantly. The rubble shifted, just enough for the girl to slip through. "Go." Elira screamed, shoving her forward. The child vanished into the gap. Elira turned, blocking the path with her body, as the brood surged upon her. The last thing she saw was the patriarch far above, its eyes glowing brighter now, its hiss rising like the breath of a god. The hive had chosen its prey, and it would not let go. The darkness swallowed her. Elira crawled through the gap after the child, her body shredded by stone and steel. Blood streaked her arms. Her lungs scraped raw. But she kept moving, teeth clenched, forcing herself forward until the narrow passage widened. The girl waited, shaking, her small hands covered in dust. Elira pulled her close, pressing her cheek against the child's tangled hair. "Quiet," she whispered. "Don't breathe too loud." They crouched in the shadow of a broken chamber. It smelled of oil and old blood. The ceiling sagged, pipes dangling like entrails. Every sound echoed too long, as if the hive itself listened. Then came the footsteps. Not hurried. Not clumsy. Slow. Deliberate. The brood was hunting. Elira pressed the girl against the wall, swallowing her own terror. Through a crack in the rubble, she glimpsed movement, shapes passing, their eyes glowing faint in the dark. Some carried weapons stolen from dead guardsmen, their barrels glistening with rust. Others bore nothing but claws. All moved with the same rhythm, as if one mind guided them. The patriarch. The girl whimpered. Elira's hand tightened over her mouth. Her heart hammered so violently she feared it would betray them. The cultists paused. One lifted its head, inhaling deeply. Its jaw opened, a tongue flickering like a serpent. It turned toward the rubble. Elira's blood froze. A noise saved them. Far down the passage, something crashed, metal tearing loose, echoing like thunder. The brood turned in unison, shrieking, sprinting toward the sound. Elira exhaled shakily, clutching the girl. The reprieve was only seconds. She dragged them deeper into the chamber, through another opening half buried in ash. This tunnel was narrow, suffocating. The walls pulsed with heat. And as they crawled, Elira saw them. Bodies. Dozens, maybe hundreds, cocooned in thick membranes, hanging from pipes. Some were dead, their faces slack. Others twitched faintly, chests rising in shallow breaths. Elira's stomach turned. She knew what this was. The breeding chambers. The girl stopped, staring at one of the cocoons. Inside was a man, his face pale, his chest straining against the fleshy prison. His eyes fluttered open, meeting Elira's. His lips moved. No sound came, but she read the word. Run. The cocoon convulsed. His chest split as something pushed outward, wet and terrible. His scream finally came, muffled, cut short as his body collapsed. The child sobbed. Elira pulled her away, forcing her down the tunnel. Behind them, the chambers stirred. Dozens of cocoons shivered, as if answering the first. Something was hatching. They ran. The tunnel spat them into another chamber, vast, hollow, its walls broken open to reveal a void beyond. The floor was a jagged slope of rubble leading downward, and at its base glowed a pit of sickly green light. Elira froze. It was a nest. Hundreds of cultists knelt around the pit, their bodies swaying in rhythm. From the pit rose smoke, thick and oily, filling the air with a stench of burning flesh. And at the center of it, half buried in the glow, the patriarch writhed. Its claws flexed, its head rising slowly. The brood's hymn grew louder as it stirred, each note vibrating through Elira's bones. The girl whispered, "It's waking." Elira pulled her back, retreating into shadow. But the brood's voices climbed higher, shrieks mingling with prayer, until the sound was no longer worship but madness. The patriarch opened its eyes. The chamber shuddered. Stones fell, dust rained. The pit erupted with a psychic scream that tore through Elira's skull. She clutched her head, blood dripping from her nose. The child cried out, writhing in pain. The cultists rose, as one, their claws raised. They had heard their god. Elira stumbled backward, dragging the child into the dark. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew that if the patriarch's gaze found them now, they would never leave the hive alive. She whispered, half to herself, half to the girl, "We have to keep moving. We can't stop." Her voice trembled. Because in her heart, she knew. The hive would not let them leave. The hive bled around them. Pipes burst, spilling steam. Rubble shifted with every tremor. The deeper Elira dragged the child, the more the tunnel seemed alive, breathing, pulsing, groaning under their weight. Everywhere, the whispers followed. Closer, closer. Not just voices now, but thoughts, pressing into her skull. The patriarch was inside her head. She felt its hunger, its delight. Every step she took, it knew. The girl clutched her arm, whispering, "It's here." Elira didn't answer. Her voice would crack. Her courage would break. She simply pulled the child faster, her ankle throbbing, blood dripping from her hands. The corridor narrowed, forcing them single file. Behind them, claws scraped stone. The brood was coming. Shapes flickered in the dark. Cultists crawled along the ceiling, their eyes glowing, jaws split wide. More surged through side passages, their shrieks rising like an endless chorus. The patriarchs will drove them now. The whole hive was a hunting ground. Elira stumbled, nearly falling. The girl screamed, pulling her up. Together they lurched forward, until the passage ended in a wall of collapsed steel. No way through. The brood closed in. Elira spun, pressing the child behind her. Her chest heaved, her fists clenched around a rusted rebar she had snatched from the rubble. It was useless against claws, but it was all she had. The first cultist emerged, its face half man, half monster, eyes wide with devotion. It hissed, raising its claw. Elira swung. The bar smashed into its temple. Bone cracked. It fell twitching, but two more replaced it instantly. They surged as one. Elira screamed, striking wildly, blood spraying her face. Her arms burned, her body failing, but she did not stop. She would not stop. The girl sobbed, Elira. And then, a sound. Distant, muffled, but real. A low rumble that shook the rubble around them. Not the patriarch. Not the brood. Gunfire. Elira froze. The brood hissed, startled. The sound grew louder, explosions, shouting, lost fire crackling through the tunnels. Imperial soldiers. A purge team. The cult shrieked, splitting their swarm. Some rushed forward to fight the newcomers, their screeches echoing. Others tightened the circle around Elira. She had seconds. Elira grabbed the child and threw herself at the rubble, clawing, bleeding, forcing her way into the narrowest gap. Stone cut her arms, metal tore her clothes, but she shoved the girl through, squeezing after. Behind her, the brood shrieked, claws raking stone. Ahead, faint light glimmered. Elira pulled the child close, gasping into her ear. Don't look back. Just run. And they crawled, leaving the patriarch's song behind. For now, the world above was dead. Elira stumbled out of the underhive ruins, dragging the little girl by the hand. Smoke rolled across the broken avenues where the hive city had once reached for the stars. Towers lay in jagged heaps, their metal bones jutting like spears against the blood-red sky. Fire gnawed at the wreckage, turning the air into poison. There were no more screams. Only silence, broken by the creak of collapsing ruins. Elira dropped to her knees, clutching the child against her chest. She wanted to believe they had survived, that crawling through ash and blood had meant something. But the patriarch's voice still haunted her mind. Its whispers clung like cobwebs, soft, poisonous, promising that escape was only an illusion. Shadows shifted in the smoke ahead. Her grip tightened on the bent rebar in her hand, ready for cultists. But the figures that emerged wore rebreathers and armor, the Aquila etched across their breastplates. Imperial soldiers. Their boots crushed bone and glass as they approached. Civilians, one rasped. His squad moved in, pulling Elira and the girl to their feet. A cloak was draped around their shoulders, heavy and warm. "You're safe now," the soldier said. But his voice carried no conviction. Elira let herself be led into a manufactorum converted into a field station. The place reeked of blood and disinfectant. Rows of wounded lay on the floor, their moans almost drowned by Vox static. Medics worked tirelessly, cauterizing wounds and whispering half-forgotten prayers as they amputated limbs. Elira and the child were handed water and ration bars. The girl devoured hers, Elira only stared into her tin cup. The reflection that looked back was a stranger, ash-streaked, hollow-eyed, more corpse than woman. And beneath the weariness, something else lingered, an echo of the patriarch's hunger, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. That night, gunfire rattled beyond the ruins as the soldiers scoured for survivors, or for cultists. Fires lit the horizon like dying suns. Elira lay awake, the child pressed against her side. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw the patriarch's vast shadow, its fanged maw opening, its whispers curling like smoke into her skull. She had survived. The girl had survived. But safety? That was a lie. The hive was ash, the Emperor's light was far away, and the patriarch's voice was not gone. It waited, patient, a sickness buried deep. As the soldiers prayed to the Emperor for deliverance, Elira whispered no prayers at all. She held the child tighter and stared into the flames, knowing the silence was only temporary. The war had burned the hive to cinders. But the shadows beneath the ashes were still alive.